Good evening, listener. Thanks for joining us. You're listening to Horror Story Time. Please welcome your host and the star of this series, master storyteller, Otis Gyrie.
The Black Pill by Aaron Shotwell. There was a time in my life when I just stopped caring. I stopped caring about my goals and ambitions. I stopped caring about my social life. After a while, I even stopped caring about my health. It might have been depression, but it felt deeper than that to me, and it led me down an unhealthy road. I was a pill popper, addicted to sleep aids. It became a chemical dependency, but I had already fallen deep into the addiction long before then. I slept all the time, 12 hours a night, 5-hour naps, even my waking hours felt hazy. It all became a blur, and it came to a point where I'd find myself looking at the dim light of the sky between naps, unsure if I'd awoken to daybreak or late evening. I realized that I had a problem, but I didn't care. I was tired of the waking world. I couldn't find a job and was living off of the last of my unemployment checks. I had no car, and my friends had more or less gone their separate ways in life. I was living with my parents, and I couldn't help but dwell on the thought that I was too old to be there. Worse still, they knew I was spiraling beyond the point of no return, and they had stopped trying to help me. It was a wonder they even allowed me to live in their house as long as I had. I only ever found peace from the nagging in my own head in the sweet oblivion of sleep, so I did whatever I could to stay there. I took stronger and stronger pills, more and more of each, until they just didn't work like they used to. When the over-the-counter stuff no longer hit the spot, I dove into prescription-strength cocktails and washed them all down with a bottle of Jack Daniels that I kept under my bed like a dirty secret. Then, one brief and drowsy stretch of unpleasant daylight, I found what would be my last fix. I forced myself out of bed long enough for a trip to the drugstore to restock the medicine cabinet. I was a regular face there, and they knew I was an addict, but they also knew it wasn't their place to say anything, or worth their time to bother for that matter. They never spoke a word to me beyond giving the price and asking for an ID, and that's how I preferred it. I usually left with an armful of great variety. I didn't even bother looking at the names anymore, just so long as they had what I needed. Zolpidem, doxepine, trazodone, or whatever else did the trick. There was one box, however, that caught my attention on that particular run. It stood out so sharply that I dropped the other 10 I'd gathered just to pick it up. It was a small box, no larger than a pack of cards, sitting alone on an otherwise empty shelf. It was entirely black. No graphics, no instructions, no warning labels, not even a UPC code. Completely blank except for one word printed in tiny white text in the center of the front face. Time. What did that mean? Time for what? Time for bed, I muttered to myself, snickering at my own less-than-clever quip. I was intrigued, but not in a clear enough state of mind to contemplate it further, nor apparently to show discretion because the mysterious box found its way into my pocket long before I stepped up to the checkout counter. I wasn't a thief by nature, but it was clearly not a part of their inventory. Whatever it was, I wanted to try it, and I wasn't about to risk confiscation so they could avoid the legal risk of selling it or giving it away. By the time I made it home, I could think of nothing but the black box. I tossed the bag of other goodies to the nearest surface I could find, which might have been the floor. I don't remember. The box had been my undivided attention. I only remember sitting on the edge of my bed and staring at it with a fascination uncharacteristic of my mental state, slowly thumbing over its edges for a tab or inward fold. In my absent-mindedness, my nerves jumped slightly when my fingertip grazed the gap and crease, and I slowly pulled the tab loose. I slid from the box a bubble pack with only one cell containing a single pill, jet black, without markings or imprints. If I had a mind to identify it, The pill itself provided no more clues than the enigmatic package in which it came. Truth be told, though, I really didn't care. The fact that my self-destructive behavior had turned blatantly suicidal. It could have been a multivitamin. It could have been cyanide. I was going to take it regardless, and the possibility of poisoning or death didn't deter me. So, with a shrug, I pressed the pill from its cell and held it in the palm of my hand. I intended to take it without a second thought, but I hesitated again despite myself. It felt strange in a way that I still can't quite explain. It wasn't any form of pill that I recognized. It didn't feel as hard as a tablet, but it wasn't quite as soft as a gel cap. There was no joining point or powder, so it wasn't a capsule. It also felt heavy. It was no larger than a common 200 milligram ibuprofen, but it had the dense weight of a steel ball bearing. In fact, the longer I held it, the more I could feel it pressing into my palm. Its size never changed, and yet I could feel my muscles straining against the burden. I felt it pulling toward the earth, pulling down and away from me. I had to grasp my forearm with my hand just to keep it upright, but I summoned all of the strength I could muster and tossed it into my mouth. I took it dry, uncomfortable as it was, and submitted myself to whatever would come next. I told myself that I was just tired, like always. I was hallucinating. It wasn't that the pill was heavy, it was just that I had no strength left in my limbs. I tried to convince myself, even as I felt the pill slide down my throat and into my gut with a punishing gravity, crushing me to the bed. And with that overwhelming weight, it dragged my mind from the light into a darkness deeper than I had ever experienced before. When the addiction first takes hold, you have lucid dreams. They get stranger, make less sense, but they're there. After a while, though, those dreams become bursts of nonsense in timeless nothingness. Before long, you stop dreaming altogether. You just drift in and out of consciousness in motionless complacency, dead to the world and fine with it. What I experienced after taking that pill did not fit the pattern. I had a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt since long before I picked up the habit, and it was far from timeless. I felt all physical sensation dissolve away, even the glow of light beyond my eyelids, but my mind remained. And yet I could still hear. I could hear the world around me in real time, the whirring of my ceiling fan, the chirp of the birds outside, and our family dog barking at nothing as she often does. I had fallen away from the world, but I retained a small window of wakefulness through that one sense, and I heard time march by without me. In the first 2 days, I figured the pill must have put me into a coma. They say the comatose can often hear the world around them, after all. But after hearing no one enter my room to check on me, after no one showed the slightest bit of concern for my absence, I suspected something else. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew I wasn't dreaming. It was as if I had vanished, as if I had ceased to exist except for my disembodied consciousness. Explanations notwithstanding, time pressed on, and I listened. In days, I heard the morning silence as my father left for work and my mother slept in, and I heard the evening conversation and sitcoms. In weeks, I heard the coming and goings of visitors, and I heard the dogs whining when the house was empty. In months, I heard complaints of bills and drama with family and friends. I heard time pass as I had come to know it. Then, in years, familiar sounds faded into something else, something troubling. I heard fear and distress in the voices beyond my door, quiet apprehension of something yet to come. I heard panicked screams and unrest beyond my walls. I heard explosions, both distant and near, wailing and warped car alarms, cracking and shattering, breaking and crumbling, and the roaring of flames. Sounds of destruction, sounds of atrocity, sounds of terror. And then, all at once, silence, but for a ghostly whisper of wind. After what I can only guess had been several decades, I finally awoke. With a sharp breath, I opened my eyes to a blurry haze and vertigo. The sensation in my limbs returned with a dull ache, and the sharp pinching at my pressure points against the hard wooden surface. I had awoken in the shallow pit of my waterbed frame, the mattress long since slashed and drained, staring up at my broken and dusty ceiling fan. Slowly, laboriously, I sat up and tried to focus my visions, and my joints felt stiff and frozen with the years I had slept away. As the haze cleared, I took in the sight of a desolate shadow of the world I once knew. All that remained were the broken shambles of my furniture and belongings. My television, slumped, with a shattered screen atop the pile of splintered boards that used to be my wall unit. My bedside table had been blown by some impact through my closet, and the doors lay in its caved-in wreckage. Even the structure of my bed frame did not survive the disaster. It fell apart under my grip as I tried to climb out, sending me sprawling to the floor with scraped palms atop a coat of stray papers littering the carpet. They crumpled in my grip and under my bare feet as I stood, and I recognized them. They were the torn pages from my book collection. Many lay scattered about and discarded, but most lay in a pile of char and ash left behind from someone's evident attempt at a campfire. Or, for all I knew, maybe they just wished to be rid of the words on the pages themselves. Madness had clearly taken the world while I slept, after all. I hardly had a moment to come to terms with what I saw before I heard my bedroom door rattle and a harsh breeze whistled from beyond. With great hesitation and a sinking feeling in my stomach, I reached slowly for the knob. The ash upon its surface blackened my hand as the decrepit hinges groaned and crunched in protest, and I opened the door to reveal still more devastation. A dry gust of air passed over my skin as I took my first step beyond that threshold and into the ruins of what had been once my home. The hallway had collapsed in a mound of plaster and shattered drywall, impassable except for the living room to my right, or rather what was left of it. Several of the walls had been all but destroyed, laying in piles of rubble scattered about the scarce patches of dead grass that was once our front lawn. I could see the houses across the street, and our neighbors had fared no better. Even those homes of proud and orderly owners had been reduced to silent tombs. Words escaped me. I could barely breathe. There were too many questions, too few answers. There was no life in this place, this corpse of our former world. I had not taken more than a few steps there, and I already felt that mine was the only consciousness left. I could only stare in awe at the aftermath of an unknown cataclysm, marvel in the dreaded hopelessness of it all. It consumed me. It took me a few minutes before I gathered the will to move again. Ash and dust exhumed like a forlorn sigh from the carpet with my every step, and I stopped a few more paces in. My father's impressive entertainment center sat upon the teetering surface of its broken stand, the LCD screen cracked and bleeding, and its housing weakly holding together with a few bolts and screws. My mother's bell collection had mostly fallen to ceramic shards and powder upon their warped shelves. The kitchen stove and refrigerator lay overturned upon fractured tiling, and all of the area rugs had been either burned or torn, mostly both. The only structure still standing with its original integrity was the dining room table, and upon it sat a familiar object that struck my heart with pain and longing. A decorative glass chess set with a game in progress, covered in cobwebs and that same coat of ash. Chess was sacred to me. It was a pastime my father and I shared, and an experience over which we bonded throughout my childhood. It was the source of many of my fondest memories: clubs, statewide tournaments, time on the road, and finally feeling like one of the grown-ups. Skill on the board knew no age. The moment I saw it, I missed my dad. I missed the world I slept away. Then, just as I went to touch one of the pieces, I heard a raspy voice over my shoulder. "It's my son's move." With a startled jump, I quickly turned to face the sound. There, seated in their recliners, as always, were the withered ghosts of what had once been my parents. I said that mine was the only consciousness that I could feel, and the image before me didn't change that fact. As they were, they might as well have been part of the mangled furniture. They had once been relatively heavy people, and it had since been reduced almost literally to skin and bones. They had turned paler than I had ever seen any living thing. Even my father, a black man, had taken on a complexion as white and dry as the ash coating everything else in the house. "Dad?" Tried to get his attention, but I received no response, not even a turn of the head. I reproached him with the smallest of steps, and I struggled to find words. "Dad, what happened?" Still no response. I knelt before him, trying to make eye contact that he never returned, and his eyes were cracked, red, and soulless. It was like he didn't even see me, and it choked me up. "Dad, it's me. It's Aaron. Can you hear me?" At last he spoke. "It's my son's move. Mate in 3. My win. Mate in 3. Or 4. He didn't speak to me, but past me, into thin air, a mindless ramble. "Knight to Queen's Rook 7. Bishop to 2. I shook my head in despair. I turned to my mother, watched her stare blankly into the middle distance with shallow, almost undetectable breaths. She appeared as a corpse, frozen in her final moments, and I'd have considered her as such were it not for the slightest movement of her hand stroking the head of our late family dog, now nothing more than a rotting and matted carcass laying still in her lap. Her eyes were as vacant as my father's, elsewhere, and focused on nothing. To her right was a third chair, empty and somehow untouched but for a prominent cigarette burn on the right arm. It was my chair, a chair in which I would have sat when the disaster struck, the chair in which I should have sat now, thin, pale, and absent of mind like my parents. But I slept time away, and some horror I would never know took them without me. I had abandoned them, just like I had emotionally abandoned them before all of this took place. I was crushed. It was all too much to take, and I felt like collapsing to the floor in a fit of tears, but I didn't have the chance. Before I could even let the feeling sink in, I was jarred to my very core by the most horrific, teeth-rattling sound I had ever heard in my life. It was difficult to describe, almost like an air raid siren lowered to the thundering bellow of some colossal beast. I knelt and clutched my head in agony, my palms pressed firmly against my ears in a desperate attempt to block out the noise before it ruptured my skull. It shook the house at the remainder of its foundations, but my parents sat right where they were, seemingly unaffected. At least, at first. When the sound faded off, leaving me with ringing ears and nauseous dizziness, I watched my father stand from his chair. Although stand isn't really the correct word. It was more that something unseen jerked him up from the chair by his shoulders like a marionette, clattering against gravity, head lolling, back arching, and joints loose and wavering. He stood, shakily on barely functioning legs, completely unaware of himself, and shambled for the door at the beckoning of that horrible call. My mother never moved an inch, never so much as spared him a glance. And all the while, he never stopped rambling to himself about the game that we would never finish. Mate in 3. I followed him as he wandered into the street, yelling after him to no avail. I stood in front of him several times trying to block his path, but he simply walked around me. He looked past me with eyes focused on a single point in the distance, and he continued to mumble to himself. Mate in 3. Knight to Queen's Rook 7. I wanted to hold him in place, to hug him tightly and never let go, but I refrained from touching him in fear that his fragile form might collapse into dust. I couldn't stop him, so I followed him. I don't know why. I suppose I just wanted to protect him from whatever harm was sure to come. He may have been an empty shell, maybe not even my father anymore, but I still loved him. For the first few blocks, I couldn't see where he was going, but his path was a straight shot without any regard for the former rules of the road that, for me, were still so deeply ingrained. No need to use crosswalks or look both ways, since speeding vehicles were clearly no longer a hazard. And even if they were, he was too lost in his days to care for his own safety. The farther we walked, the more horrific the destruction appeared. Rusted and severely dented cars with shattered windshields, some missing doors, buildings fallen to piles of bricks, upturned pavement, and broken signs, wayward papers and garbage blowing in the wind, leaning street lamps, dangling spotlights, and snapped power lines without a single spark of electricity. Utter ruin as far as the eye could see, nothing left whole, but I noticed something far more telling. Most of the cars were still parked, except for a few remaining in their lanes on the road, and almost all still set firmly on all four wheels. I could see no signs of riots or looting, no police barricades, no military presence. Like my parents in their chairs, everything stood where one would expect to find it on any uneventful day. There were a few overturned garbage cans here and there, and some remnants of bonfires, but few and far between. Regardless of the prolonged sounds of horror I heard in my sleep, whatever happened seemed to have happened in a flash, a matter of minutes or seconds, to reduce the world to that pitiful state. I'd assumed that there must have been very few survivors, and even most of them had likely perished shortly after. But that thought didn't last. We weren't alone for long. As we stepped onto one of the main streets, a great many shambling husks of former people joined us, all as ailing as my father. They emerged from neighboring alleyways, crawled from within ruined cars, and wandered from the few remaining structures still sound enough to house them. All of them mindlessly hobbled toward the same point on the horizon, a point that I could now see clearly down a stretch of empty road. Suspended in midair at a considerable height, a massive, black, bell-shaped edifice loomed over a great fissure in the earth in the slowly nearing distance. From that fissure roared a tower of intense fire, and the smoke rose and vanished into the bell's vast hollow. The towering bell reflected no light, even that of the flames licking the air beneath it, and it almost appeared as a gaping hole in the sky. Yet I could see brief glimpses of something akin to starlight in the depths of its darkness, something rhythmic, mechanical, something designed. As we pressed slowly onward, we were joined by even more hobbling shells of former people, packing even closer as we neared the bell's parade of the living dead. I looked around me, and I noticed familiar faces among them, mumbling and groaning like the rest. My younger brother, Adam, silently walked hand in hand with my 7-year-old niece, Charlotte, and she wheezed as though struck with a bout of asthma. Juan, one of my best friends of 23 years, walked several steps ahead of his wife, Karina, who dragged her broken leg. Old co-workers kept their pace in the crowd, and family and friends I hadn't spoken to in ages followed just as near. They came from all across the city to converge beneath the bell, gathering to a stifling mass that bunched together, shoulder to shoulder, until there was no direction to move but forward. And as more of them came, I could feel a new, menacing presence among them. It somehow managed to weave in and out of the crowd, though unlike the walking husks I had seen so far, this presence was watchful and very much aware, shepherding and guiding the lost souls around me. They drifted by in small groups, perhaps even more than I perceived, perhaps fewer. They only appeared for fleeting moments at the farthest corners of my vision, vaguely humanoid shadows that retreated from direct sight much like floaters in the eye. They defied clear identification, and they came in all sizes, from impossibly diminutive gnomes to imposing giants, but each as elusive as the last. Whatever they weren't human, and they meant us harm. I don't know how I knew, but I was sure. They were the ones who destroyed our world. We marched ever nearer to the bell in the sky, and the dark things began to take a particular interest in me. They could tell that I still retained whatever spiritual essence they had since torn from everyone else. They appeared more briefly to me, but plainly. I could see their inhuman faces, and some wore expressions of what might have been confusion. Some were obviously grinning. I could hear their voices, no speech that I could recognize, but meaningless grunts, and at times I thought I heard laughter. I fascinated them, but they never attacked me. In fact, they hardly even approached me. They watched me from a distance, as if anticipating some reaction to whatever horror I steadily approached alongside the rest of the cattle. Soon, as we took our final steps toward the bell, I understood their sadistic fascination. With the cruelty of morality undeveloped children, they were watching an ant skitter about beneath a magnifying glass as it fled from the scorching light. I had unconsciously expected the gathering to come to a halt just short of the fire pit and await whatever had called them, but they didn't. They walked willingly into the flames like lemmings, snuffing out their own lives without hesitation at the horrible call of the keepers of the Black Bell. They came in turns, came on command to their mass execution, and now the crowd had grown so thick and tightly packed that I could not run to save myself. They marched toward the flame despite me, and each step they took forced me closer to the sharing of their fate. I was less than 50 feet away now. The raging heat relentlessly lashed at my face until my skin felt as though it would melt away. I cried out to my loved ones in the crowd, begged for them to stop, to turn around and flee to safety, but they still continued to march. Each body hurled into the fire, vaporized in an instant, each releasing an explosive stench of burnt hair and flesh, and their ashes rose obediently into the compelling hollow of the bell. The dense cloud of the burning dead stung my eyes and fogged them with blackness. The crackling roar of the flames grew ferocious, and the laughter of the dark things grew louder in my ears and in my head with every passing second. I closed my eyes only for a moment before I found myself in the next row of sacrifices to the bell in the sky, and my father took his final meandering steps into the burning pit. I grabbed his arm and shouted after him, screaming anything I could to stop him. I told him that I loved him, begged him not to leave me, told him I was sorry for what I had become, sorry that I had abandoned him, Mom, and everyone else. But it was too late. His arm slipped from my grip, and even as he tumbled into the flames, he never once stopped mumbling his certainty of a victory that would never come. Knight to Queen's Rook 7, Mate in 3. I screamed in horror and anguish as he vanished in a white flare, and his ashes followed the rest into the gaping hollow of the bell. Then, against my most stubborn resistance, against my wails of terrified protest, my turn came next. The last thing I saw was the horde of dark things watching me from the other side, chuckling with satisfaction as the crowd at my back shoved me into the pit. And with a white-hot flash, my mind fell into the darkness of sleep once more. Of course, I lived to tell this tale. I awoke moments later in my bed, in my still standing house, and to the sound of my family talking and laughing in the next room. I never took another pill after that. Not so much as a harmless vitamin tablet. It might be a disappointment to any horror enthusiasts, hearing that it was all a dream after all, but I'm still not sure of that. Regardless, whatever it was, a nightmare or not, I felt that I had been given a second chance, and I did not waste it. It was time to get my life back on track. I doubled my efforts to find a job, and I moved out of that house a few weeks later. I forced myself into the outside world, reconnected with old friends, even managed to provide my cynicism wrong and find myself a girlfriend. After pressuring him for a while, I convinced my father to start playing in chess tournaments with me again, and we've never been closer. I learned a much-needed lesson that day, and my life has turned around for the better. Still, the dream continues to haunt me, and the fear has never left me. I'm still paranoid at times. I still hear the maddening chuckle of the dark things in the night, and I'm terrified of open flames. Condemned buildings and wrecked cars send my mind reeling with memories of the wasteland I saw. Most of all, one haunting observation ceaselessly torments me these days. You see, when I had that dream, there was only one recliner in our living room, my father's chair. My mother and I usually sat on a small couch. However, when I visited my parents not long ago, I found that they had replaced the couch with two more recliners. The empty chair, my chair, matches the room perfectly, except for one imperfection: a familiar cigarette burn on its right arm. Hi, Otis Gyrie here. Thanks for joining me around the digital campfire today. Your support means everything to me. I wanted to take a moment to ask you to support me and help me make storytelling my career by joining the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights members area. There are links in the video description below. If you love what I do, help me make this my full-time job by signing up for any membership of your choice. With your support, I can quit my day job and dedicate my day to putting out more twisted tales more regularly and take more of your requests. With a membership, not only do you get instant access to my archive of 200-plus audio stories in HD format, but you'll get them weeks or months before the public does. You'll also get access to the full archive of hundreds of fully produced Chilling Tales for Dark Nights tales, including several narrated by me, and advanced access there as well. In addition to that, you'll get exclusive members-only access to private monthly livestream events and direct access to me and the rest of the team via the Direct Connect and Production Lounge features, where you'll get the opportunity to let your voice be heard and get insider updates. Members will also get the opportunity to earn money by referring friends and family to us. So what are you waiting for? For as little as $6.66 a month with an annual membership, you can help our channels grow and help me make my dream come true. So, thanks again for listening, and please consider giving up a cup of Starbucks or that pack of energy drinks to help this old storyteller live his dream. Visit us today at http://www.chillingtalesfordarknights.com/tour for information and sign up now.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.